I sold my old house to help my son buy his dream home, thinking I'd finally have peace in my later years. Last week, he changed the Wi-Fi password and told me I didn't need it. Old people should keep their minds calm. At first, I thought it was just a careless remark, but then I discovered the papers he was hiding in his office. Papers that didn't just threaten my place in this house, but everything I had left. Min Johnson Sung Buok Sang. Chapter 1a, Character Introduction and Normal Life Theo Jongdan Inang Kaplan Du. Ben Muon Min Bat Jauviet Chapter 1a. 800 Du, Ngay Hong. Theo Format Ban Yiu Kau. My name is Linda Parker, and I turned 58 last winter. If someone had told me 30 years ago that my life would come full circle, ending where it began, in a house full of family, I would have believed it with all my heart. For most of my life, I believed family was the one thing you could count on, the one anchor that would never let you drift away. I built my life on that belief, piece by piece, year by year. I wasn't born with much. My parents were working-class people from a small Midwestern town. They taught me that a roof over your head, a warm meal, and someone who loves you are all you really need. I carried that lesson into adulthood, and when I met Michael Parker, my late husband, we worked together to create that very kind of life. He was steady, dependable, the kind of man who never broke a promise. When Michael passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Grief doesn't move in a straight line. It comes in waves, and I found myself adrift, holding on to the only constant I had left, our son, Alex. Alex was my pride and joy. Every decision I had made, every hour I had worked as an elementary school teacher, every dollar I had saved, it was all for him. Alex had grown into a tall, confident man. He had a good job in the city, a charming smile, and a way of making people believe he could take care of everything. When he told me he'd found a house in the suburbs and wanted me to move in with him, I felt something I hadn't felt since Michael's death. Relief. "It'll be easier for you, Mom," he said. "We can look out for each other." By then, my old house had become too quiet, too full of echoes. I decided to sell it. Every piece of furniture, every picture frame, every box of memories felt like it belonged in the past. I put the money from the sale into Alex's new home, believing that this house would be where our family's next chapter began. The move itself was exhausting but full of small joys. I took pride in unpacking boxes in the bright kitchen, smelling the fresh paint on the walls, planting flowers in the front garden. I told myself this was my home now, too, even though my name wasn't on the deed. Life settled into a new rhythm. In the mornings, I woke up early to make coffee. Sometimes I packed Alex's lunch for work, just like I did when he was a boy. In the afternoons, I took care of Lily, my 6-year-old granddaughter, while her parents worked. She brought laughter back into my days, and every time she wrapped her little arms around my neck, I felt needed again. At dinner, we'd sit around the table, Alex telling stories about work, Sarah sharing updates about Lily's school. I mostly listened, happy to be part of the chatter. I told myself that the slight distance I sometimes sensed from Sarah was just her personality. Polite, but private. Alex reassured me that she appreciated everything I did, even if she didn't say it out loud. I truly believed I was in the right place. For the first time in years, I wasn't lonely. The house was warm. There was life and laughter in every room. I ignored the little things, the way Alex sometimes avoided talking about money, or how Sarah seemed to prefer I keep to certain parts of the house. Those things felt minor compared to the comfort of being surrounded by family again. There were quiet moments, too. In the evenings, when the house was still, I'd sit in my small room at the back, looking out the window at the garden I'd planted. I would think about how life had a way of coming back around. I had started my marriage in a house full of dreams, and here I was again in another house full of possibilities. At 58, I thought I had found peace. I told myself I had done everything right. I worked hard. I sacrificed for my son. I gave him the best start I could. And now, in my later years, I would finally rest in the safety of his care. I didn't know then that this house, this home I helped him buy, would soon feel less like a sanctuary and more like a place where I would have to fight for my dignity. I didn't know that the very walls I decorated, the garden I tended, and the life I thought we were building together would become the stage for a betrayal I never saw coming. For now, though, I chose to believe in the dream. Alex had always been the boy everyone admired. Growing up, teachers praised his intelligence, neighbors admired his manners, and I proudly watched him win scholarships and job offers. But as I sat in the kitchen of his new suburban home, I began to notice a different side of him. Subtle at first, but hard to ignore once you knew what to look for. Alex was practical, efficient, in his own words, focused on results. He approached life like a series of transactions, each one carefully weighed for cost and benefit. When he spoke to me, there was still warmth, but it was no longer unconditional warmth. It was the kind of affection that seemed to live alongside calculation. I told myself it was just adulthood. People change when they have families and mortgages. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, was polite to me in every visible way. She always greeted me when she came home from work, sometimes even brought me a cup of tea. But there was an invisible wall between us, one that never seemed to come down. She liked her home, neat, orderly, and under her control. I could sense it in the way she rearranged the kitchen after I cooked, or how she preferred that I keep my things confined to my room. Sarah wasn't cruel. She never raised her voice, but her boundaries were firm, even when unspoken. She spoke to me like a guest she didn't want to offend, but also didn't want to invite too deeply into her personal life. I often wondered if she had ever truly agreed to the idea of me moving in, or if it was something she accepted for Alex's sake. Then there was Lily, my bright, beautiful granddaughter. At 6 years old, she was the light in my days. She would run into my room without knocking, climb onto my lap, and tell me stories about her day at school. We baked cookies together on Saturday mornings, played card games in the afternoons, and curled up with storybooks at night. In Lily's eyes, there were no walls, no boundaries, only love. Our evenings as a family followed a routine that looked perfect from the outside. Alex would come home from work, loosen his tie, and talk about the projects he was handling. Sarah would share updates about Lily's progress in school. I would sit quietly, adding a comment here or there, careful not to intrude too much on their conversations. I told myself I was part of their lives, but deep down I wondered if I was more of an observer than a participant. On weekends, we sometimes had family outings, to the park, to Lily's dance recitals, or to the farmer's market. These trips were pleasant, but I noticed small things. The way Alex discussed money in a clipped, controlled tone when bills came in, or how Sarah occasionally referred to their house, as though my presence was temporary. I brushed these feelings aside. I reminded myself that every household has its rhythms, and I was still adjusting to theirs. But sometimes, late at night, I would hear Alex and Sarah talking in low voices after Lily had gone to bed. The tone was serious, sometimes tense, though I could never make out the words. One evening, I overheard my own name. My heart sank a little, though I told myself it was probably nothing. Still, the sound of my name in those hushed tones lingered in my mind long after the house had gone quiet. There were other moments, small, fleeting, but impossible to forget. The day I rearranged a shelf in the pantry to make space for my baking supplies, Sarah moved everything back the next morning without a word. The time I offered to help Alex with some paperwork, and he told me, gently but firmly, that he had it under control. From the outside, we looked like a happy, functional family, and most of the time it felt that way. But underneath, there was a current I couldn't quite name, something that made me feel as though I was always standing just outside the circle, close enough to see the warmth, but not quite inside it. I reminded myself of why I came here, because Alex had asked me to, because he said it would be easier this way, because I believed that in my later years I would be surrounded by love, not boundaries. Still, sometimes, when I caught Sarah's careful smile or Alex's measured tone, I wondered if their invitation had been about love or about something else entirely. It started small, so small I almost didn't notice. At first, it was just a passing comment over breakfast. "Mom, maybe try to use the stove earlier in the day," Alex said one morning, pouring himself coffee. "Sarah likes to get dinner started around 5, and it just keeps things simpler." I smiled, nodded, and told myself it was nothing. After all, every household had its routines. A few days later, he mentioned it again, this time more directly. "Mom, if you need the kitchen, can you try to wrap things up before late afternoon? It's just easier for everyone." His tone was polite, but there was an edge underneath it, an unspoken message that my presence needed managing. Then came the living room. I had gotten used to watching a few of my favorite old TV shows in the evenings after Lily went to bed. One night, I came in to find Alex already there, remote in hand, a sports game on the screen. "Mom, Sarah, and I usually unwind here after Lily's asleep," he said, not unkindly, but firmly. "Maybe you could use your tablet in your room? The couch just gets crowded." It was such a small thing, but the way he said it made something twist in my stomach. I told myself not to overthink it. This was his house. Our house, I reminded myself, and I didn't want to be difficult. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, I opened my laptop to pay a bill and realized I couldn't connect to the internet. I tried my phone, same problem. I checked the router, but it was working fine. I waited until Alex came home and asked if the Wi-Fi was down. He smiled, an easy, almost casual smile. "Oh, I changed the password," he said. "You don't need it, Mom. It's better for your peace of mind." For a second, I didn't know what to say. His tone was light, as though he was making a harmless joke, but his words landed heavy. Better for my peace of mind. As if my access to the world beyond these walls was something that needed controlling. I laughed softly, trying to mask the sting. "I only needed it to pay some bills," I said, keeping my voice steady. He waved a hand. "I'll take care of that for you. You shouldn't worry about these things. It's not good for you at your age." That night, I sat in my room, staring at my silent laptop. The walls felt closer than usual. I tried to convince myself it was just Alex being overprotective, just a son trying to take care of his mother, but there was something in his tone that I couldn't shake, a quiet authority that made me feel less like family and more like a guest. Over the next few weeks, little changes piled up. My shelf in the kitchen slowly lost space to Sarah's cookbooks and Alex's coffee gadgets. My seat at the dinner table was shifted so Lily could sit between her parents. Even my gardening supplies were moved from the garage to a small storage bin outside. None of it was cruel, none of it was loud, but each small shift seemed to move me further toward the edges of the life I thought I was a part of. Sometimes I would catch Sarah looking at me, not unkindly, but with a careful, measured expression, like she was calculating where I fit in her world. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear Alex's voice from the living room, low and serious, discussing things I couldn't quite make out. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I had come here because Alex invited me. I had sold my house, given him my trust, and believed that in this home I would be safe. But a small, persistent voice inside me whispered that something was shifting, and not in my favor. For now, I stayed quiet. But I couldn't shake the feeling that these small changes weren't random. They were steps in a direction I didn't yet understand. It happened on an ordinary Thursday, the kind of day that begins without warning of what's coming. The sun was pouring into the kitchen, the smell of coffee drifting through the air, and Lily was coloring at the table. I was rinsing breakfast dishes when Alex walked in with that certain look on his face, the one he wore when he had something practical to discuss. "Mom," he began, leaning casually against the counter, "I've been going over our monthly expenses." I turned, drying my hands. "Oh? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he said quickly. "It's just, With the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and everything else, it's been a bit tight lately. Sarah and I were talking, and we think it might be fair if you could contribute a little toward the household costs. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. Contribute? Nothing big, he added quickly, his tone measured. Just a small amount each month to help cover your share. Since you're here full time, it would make things easier for everyone. I stared at him, my mind scrambling. My share of the house I helped him buy, the house that only stood because I sold my own and poured the proceeds into this place. Alex, I said slowly, I gave you the down payment for this home. You wouldn't have it without that money. He nodded, as if this were an irrelevant detail. I know, Mom, and I'm grateful for that, I really am. But that was years ago, and right now, we just need to keep things balanced. It's nothing personal, it's just math. The words landed heavier than he realized. Nothing personal. To him, maybe it wasn't. To me, it was everything. I felt Lily's small eyes on me from across the table, her crayon frozen mid-stroke. I forced a smile, unwilling to let her see the shift in the room. How much were you thinking? Maybe just a few hundred a month, Alex replied, as though this were the most reasonable request in the world. It'll cover utilities, groceries, your part of things. I wanted to argue, to remind him of all the years I'd raised him alone after his father died, of the countless nights I'd stayed up grading papers to make sure he had everything he needed. I wanted to say that I hadn't moved here as a tenant. I had moved here as his mother. But I also knew Alex. He hated conflict, and when pressed, his politeness could turn into something sharper. So I swallowed the words. All right, I said, my voice steady, if that's what will help. Thanks, Mom, he said, smiling as though I'd just agreed to a minor favor. He patted my shoulder before heading upstairs, leaving me in the kitchen with the hum of the refrigerator and the echo of his request. I stood there for a long time, hands resting on the counter. The sunlight streaming through the window felt colder now. That night, I sat in my room, calculator in hand, going over my finances. I had savings, enough to keep me comfortable, but I'd never expected to pay rent, not here, not in the home I'd helped secure. It wasn't the money that stung the most. It was what the request represented, a shift in how Alex saw me, not as his mother, but as someone who needed to justify her place. At dinner, the topic didn't come up again. Alex chatted about work, Sarah talked about Lily's reading progress, and I kept my smile in place. But inside, something had shifted. Over the next few days, Alex sent me a polite email. An actual email detailing the monthly arrangement. The amount was smaller than market rent, of course, but that wasn't the point. Seeing my living situation summarized in terms and figures was like looking at a contract I'd never agreed to sign. I paid the first month quietly. I told myself it was just to keep the peace, that it didn't mean anything more. But every time I handed over that money, I felt a piece of my dignity slip away. Sarah seemed lighter after the arrangement began. She spoke to me a little more freely, though her tone remained measured. Alex was polite, almost overly so, as though the transfer of money had made our relationship more transactional. And through it all, Lily remained my safe place. She would climb into my lap after school, asking me to read her favorite book for the 100th time, completely unaware of the quiet shift in the air. I told myself I could live with it. I told myself it was temporary, but deep down I knew this was more than just a small contribution. It was a change in status, a step towards something I couldn't yet name, but could feel looming in the distance. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. I sat on the edge of my bed, the quiet hum of the house pressing in on me. Alex's request from the day before lingered in my mind like a sour taste that wouldn't fade. It wasn't the money that unsettled me. It was the realization that somewhere along the way, my place in this home had shifted. I walked into the kitchen, the floor cold beneath my slippers. The coffee machine burbled softly, filling the room with its familiar smell, but the comfort it usually brought felt muted. Sarah was at the counter, scrolling on her phone, a faint smile on her lips. She looked up when I entered. "Good morning," she said politely, as always. "Good morning," I replied, forcing my voice to sound steady. She didn't mention the arrangement Alex had discussed with me, and I didn't bring it up. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if she had been the one to suggest it. It was easier to think of it as Alex's idea alone, but deep down, I knew they had probably talked it over together. I sat at the table, wrapping my hands around my mug. The warm ceramic grounded me, but my thoughts drifted to memories I had kept tucked away. I remembered the years after Michael passed, how I'd worked late into the evenings, taking extra shifts at school to pay for Alex's college tuition. I remembered selling my jewelry to cover his first car, his first apartment deposit, and then, more recently, the day I signed the papers to sell my own home, transferring the money to Alex so that he could buy this house. At the time, it hadn't felt like a sacrifice. It had felt like a gift, a natural continuation of what mothers do. Now, sitting at this table, I wondered if that gift had quietly transformed into something else, into an unspoken debt, a justification for my place here. As the day went on, I tried to shake the heaviness in my chest. I cleaned the house, tended to the garden, read with Lily after school. On the surface, everything was the same, but beneath it, my thoughts kept circling back. I noticed things I'd brushed aside before, how Alex sometimes referred to our house when talking to Sarah, but never included me in that our. How Sarah would thank me for helping around the house in the same tone someone uses for a guest who overstays their welcome. That evening at dinner, Alex was cheerful, telling a story from work. I laughed at the right moments, but my smile felt distant. Sarah passed me the salad, her expression calm. Everything looked perfectly normal from the outside. Inside, though, I felt a deep shift. I wasn't just part of this household, I was becoming a paying occupant. And there's a difference. One is built on love, the other on transaction. Later, when I retreated to my room, I closed the door quietly and sat down at my small desk. I pulled out an old photo album from the drawer. The pictures were worn at the edges, the colors fading, but the moments inside were still vivid. Alex as a baby in my arms, Alex at his high school graduation, Alex moving into his first dorm room, grinning, holding the scholarship letter I'd worked so hard to make possible. I ran my fingers over those images, feeling an ache deep in my chest. The boy in those photos had looked at me with trust, with gratitude. Now, I wondered if he saw me as someone who needed to be managed, someone whose presence had to be justified. The night felt heavy as I lay in bed, listening to the faint sound of the television downstairs. I told myself I could live with this arrangement. I told myself it was just a small shift, that nothing fundamental had changed. But I also knew the truth. The money was just the beginning. Something deeper was shifting in this house. Something that made me feel less like a mother and more like a tenant. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, the kind of day when the house usually felt calm. Sarah had taken Lily to a birthday party, and I was folding laundry in my room. Down the hall, Alex was in his office with the door half shut. I wasn't paying much attention until I heard the low, measured tone of his voice. At first, I thought he was talking to a friend, but then certain words drifted through the stillness of the hallway. Sharp, unfamiliar words that made me pause mid-fold. Legal process, transfer of ownership, timing needs to be right. I froze, the towel in my hands forgotten. His voice stayed calm, but there was a seriousness to it that felt heavier than his usual work calls. A moment later, I heard him say, "The current arrangement makes things a little tricky, but once we formalize the documents, it should be clear." My stomach tightened. Current arrangement? Formalized documents? I moved quietly toward the doorway of my room, careful not to make the floorboards creak. I wasn't close enough to catch every word, but the phrases I did hear were enough to set my mind racing. Yes, the property is in my name. We just need to make sure everything aligns. No surprises. Property. His name. No surprises. The conversation ended abruptly, and I stepped back into my room, my heart pounding. I tried to convince myself it was just work, maybe some investment or side project I didn't know about, but the mention of ownership gnawed at me. A little while later, I went into the kitchen to make tea. Sarah had returned from the party, still holding Lily's little backpack. She looked tired, distracted. "Sarah," I began casually, "I was going through some old files earlier and realized I haven't seen any of the paperwork from when Alex bought the house. Do you know where it's kept?" She blinked, her expression tightening for just a fraction of a second before she smiled politely. "Oh, I think Alex has everything in his office." "Why?" "Oh, no reason," I said, keeping my tone light. "I was just curious. You know how I like to keep things organized." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sure Alex has it handled. He's good with that sort of thing." I nodded, letting the conversation drop, but I didn't miss the way her voice shifted. Slightly faster, slightly higher. I'd been a teacher for 30 years. I could tell when someone was uncomfortable. The rest of the day passed quietly, but the thought kept circling in my mind. There was something about that phone call, about Sarah's reaction, that didn't sit right. That night, I stayed up later than usual, sipping tea at the small desk in my room. I thought about the house, how my money had made it possible, how my name had never been on the deed, how I had trusted Alex completely. For the first time since moving in, I felt an unfamiliar chill when I thought about the future. I had believed this home was my security. Now I wondered if it might be something else entirely. The next morning, I walked past Alex's office on my way to the laundry room. The door was closed, but a stack of papers sat on the small table outside. Contracts, envelopes, folders. One of them caught my eye. A manila envelope with the words, "Property Documents," written in Alex's handwriting. I hesitated. My hands itched to pick it up, to look inside. But footsteps on the stairs pulled me back, and I kept walking, forcing myself to act as though I hadn't noticed. For now, I decided, I would wait. But a seed of suspicion had been planted, and I knew it wouldn't stay dormant for long. I couldn't stop thinking about that envelope. For the next few days, the words, "Property Documents," echoed in my head like a quiet drumbeat. I went about my daily routines, making breakfast, caring for Lily, tending the garden, but my mind kept circling back to Alex's office and the papers I hadn't dared to touch. One afternoon, while Alex was at work and Sarah had taken Lily to a play date, I decided to take care of some of my own paperwork. I had a small metal box in the closet of my room where I kept old bank statements, the deed to my former house, and other important documents. As I sorted through them, I found a worn folder marked "House Transfer 3 years ago." I hadn't looked at it since the move. I remembered the day I signed the check for the down payment, how proud I'd felt watching Alex step into homeownership. At the time, I hadn't cared whose name was on the paperwork. He was my son, after all. But as I flipped through the documents now, my chest tightened. Every page listed Alex Parker as the sole owner. My name wasn't anywhere. The sale of my old house was there in black and white, the entire down payment wired directly into the purchase. And yet legally, this house wasn't mine in any way. I sat back, the folder open in my lap. It wasn't the lack of legal claim that stung the most. It was the realization that I'd never even thought to ask. I had trusted Alex so completely that the idea of protecting myself had never crossed my mind. I slipped the folder back into my box, but my thoughts kept spiraling. Alex's phone call about transfer of ownership and Sarah's nervous smile suddenly felt heavier. The next clue came 2 days later. Sarah had asked me to bring a file from Alex's office to the kitchen while she prepared dinner. She said it was in the bottom drawer, just some receipts for the home insurance. I hesitated before stepping into the office. The room smelled faintly of cologne and paper, a space that felt distinctly Alex. I found the folder Sarah had mentioned, but as I bent down to pull it out, my eyes fell on another folder labeled refinance proposal. My pulse quickened. I glanced toward the hallway. The house was silent except for the sound of running water in the kitchen. I opened the folder just enough to see the first page. Application for home equity loan, it read. The date was recent. The property listed was this house, the same house my money had bought. The loan amount was large, enough to make my stomach twist. I skimmed the page, my hands trembling. Alex was seeking to use the house as collateral. There was no mention of me anywhere, not as co-owner, not as co-signer, not even as an informed party. I slipped the folder back exactly as I found it, careful not to disturb a single paper. Walking back to my room, the weight of what I'd just seen settled over me. This wasn't just about me feeling like a guest. Alex was making financial decisions about the very house I lived in without even telling me. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling. Memories of Alex as a boy came flooding back. His first bicycle, his first big job interview, the way he'd hugged me when he got his promotion. I had believed we were a team. That family meant transparency. But now I realized there were things happening behind closed doors. And for the first time, I wondered if my son saw me not as family, but as an obstacle. I knew then that I had to find out exactly what he was planning before it was too late. A few days after I discovered the refinancing papers, I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. Her name was Carol, a former colleague from the elementary school where I'd taught for decades. We hadn't seen each other in years, and her face lit up when she recognized me. "Linda, it's been ages," she said, hugging me warmly. "How's Alex? Last time I saw him, he was just starting his first job downtown." I smiled automatically, though the question knotted my stomach. "He's busy. Doing well, I think." Carol tilted her head. "You know, I always admired how you supported him, especially back when things were rough." "Rough?" I asked, frowning. "Oh," Carol hesitated. "I assumed you knew. A few years back, before he met Sarah, Alex had some trouble with credit cards and a business loan. I heard from someone at the bank that it nearly went to collections, but it got cleared up. I thought, well, I assumed you were the one who helped him." I froze. Images from the past rushed back. The calls from Alex about short-term financial hiccups, the times I dipped into my savings without asking too many questions. He had promised each time that it was just temporary. Carol squeezed my hand. "You've always been such a good mother, Linda. I'm glad it all worked out." I smiled weakly and said goodbye, but my mind was spinning as I walked home. Those temporary problems had been more serious than I realized, and now he was applying for another large loan, using the house as collateral. That night, after Lily was in bed, I sat alone in my room, staring at the old photo of Alex on my dresser. The weight of my earlier sacrifices pressed down on me. I had bailed him out before. How many times would I have to do it again? 2 days later, another piece of the puzzle fell into place, and this time, it chilled me to my core. Sarah had asked me to bring her a baking dish from the storage closet in the garage. As I moved a stack of boxes to reach it, a thin folder slid onto the floor. It wasn't labeled, but a corner of legal stationery peeked out. Curiosity prickled my skin. I picked it up and opened it just enough to see the top page. Statement of residency, informal occupant. My eyes skimmed the lines. It was a document outlining the residency status of an unnamed individual living in the house, described as a non-contributing, non-owner occupant without legal claim to property. My hands went cold. At the bottom, in Alex's handwriting, were notes. Support agreement voluntary. Position guest not co-owner. Removal possible upon change in circumstances. Removal possible. I sank onto a nearby box, the page trembling in my hands. He wasn't just refinancing the house. He was preparing a legal framework to remove me entirely if he chose. It was as if the air had been punched out of me. I read the lines again and again, hoping I'd misunderstood, but the words stayed the same. guest. No legal claim. Removal possible. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I thought of the down payment, of the money I'd poured into this home, of the sacrifices I'd made over the years. And now, in black and white, my own son was preparing to argue that I was nothing more than a temporary guest. I replaced the folder exactly as I found it, my movements mechanical. My mind was a storm. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, replaying every moment since I moved in. The polite boundaries, the gradual limitations, the way Alex's tone had shifted from affectionate to formal. It all fit together now, an awful pattern I had refused to see until the evidence was in my hands. Alex wasn't just being practical. He wasn't just managing space or money. He was laying the groundwork for a future where I wouldn't be here at all. For years, I had believed my place in his life was secure, built on love and shared history. Now I saw that my place in this house, my place in his plans, was conditional. Conditional on my silence, on my compliance, on my willingness to accept a role that diminished me. But if Alex thought I would leave quietly, he didn't know me as well as he thought. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This wasn't the end of the story. Not yet. I didn't confront Alex that night. I didn't even let him see the faintest crack in my expression. If there's one thing I learned as a teacher, it's that you don't show your hand until you're ready to act. The next morning, I woke up with a clear plan forming in my mind. Alex thought of me as passive, someone who wouldn't question his decisions. That would be my advantage. The first step was gathering proof, everything that tied me to this house, every sacrifice I'd made. I started with the paperwork from the sale of my old home. The box in my closet held copies of the closing documents, the wire transfer records, and the letter from the bank confirming the down payment to Alex's purchase. I slipped each piece into a neat folder, labeling it simply House Records. Next, I pulled out old bank statements showing the deposits I had made into Alex's accounts over the years, helping him through temporary financial trouble. Each transfer was small enough to be explained away at the time, but together they painted a different picture. A mother who had financially supported her son far beyond the point of obligation. Then came the more delicate task, securing evidence of Alex's recent actions. I couldn't simply take the refinancing documents or the residency notes I'd seen. I needed copies. One afternoon, while Sarah was in the kitchen baking cookies with Lily, I offered to tidy up Alex's office. Sarah hesitated, but eventually agreed, distracted by Lily's enthusiastic demands for more chocolate chips. Inside the office, I worked quickly. I used my phone to photograph the refinancing application, making sure the date and property details were visible. Then I took pictures of the residency statement, the one that labeled me as a guest. I returned everything exactly as I'd found it, my hands steady. It wasn't fear that guided me now. It was resolve. Over the next few days, I made quiet trips to the local library under the guise of reading or picking up books for Lily. In truth, I was using their printer to make hard copies of everything I'd collected. One set went into a folder I kept hidden in my sewing box. The other I placed in a small lockbox at the bank. Once I had my evidence, I turned my attention to the next step, timing. If I confronted Alex too soon, he would deny everything. He might even accelerate his plans to push me out, but if I waited too long, he could finalize the refinancing and strengthen his legal position. I needed a moment when he would be off guard, when he wouldn't expect a confrontation. That's when the idea came to me. Lily's birthday. It was just a few weeks away, and Alex had planned a small party at the house. Friends, neighbors, and a few relatives would be there. He wouldn't risk making a scene in front of others, and his guard would be down. In the days leading up to the party, I went about my routines as if nothing had changed. I baked cookies with Lily, helped Sarah with party decorations, and even listened to Alex talk about his work as if I had no idea what he was planning behind the scenes. Inside, though, I was rehearsing every word I would say. I wouldn't just confront Alex. I would present the truth clearly, calmly, and in a way that left no room for denial. And there would be one final twist he wouldn't see coming. A few years ago, after Michael's death, I had quietly invested part of my savings into a small property in my hometown. It was nothing grand, just a rental that generated steady income. I had never mentioned it to Alex because I didn't want him to feel pressure or temptation. But now, that property could serve a new purpose. If Alex truly believed I had no options outside his home, he was about to learn otherwise. I planned to reveal it at the very end, not as a threat, but as a reminder. I was not dependent. I had chosen to live here out of love, not necessity. And if my presence was no longer wanted, I could walk away and take my support with me. The night before Lily's birthday, I lay in bed feeling the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. Tomorrow would decide everything. Alex thought he held all the pieces. He had no idea I'd been quietly arranging the board in my favor. Lily's birthday arrived on a sunny Saturday morning, the kind of day that seemed determined to look perfect. The house smelled of vanilla frosting and balloons bobbed gently in the corners. Sarah was fussing over the cake, carefully placing pastel candles in a neat circle. Alex moved between the living room and kitchen, making sure everything was in order. I moved quietly, setting plates and arranging the table with napkins that matched the pastel theme. On the surface, I looked like the same mother they thought I was, helpful, cheerful, invested in the day. Inside, every movement was deliberate, every glance calibrated. The guest list had been small, a few neighborhood families, some of Sarah's friends, and two of Alex's closest colleagues from work. They were people he respected, people whose opinions he wouldn't want tarnished. I had encouraged him to invite them, framing it as good networking while appearing innocently helpful. By noon, the house buzzed with voices. Lily darted between the adults in her sparkly birthday dress, her laughter bright and unrestrained. I smiled genuinely at her joy, letting it ground me in the moment. Today was still her day, no matter what conversations would happen later. Alex seemed relaxed, unaware of the storm building beneath the surface. He greeted his friends warmly, poured drinks, and chatted about work. Every now and then he would glance at me with a nod of gratitude for helping with the preparations. To him, I was still the quiet, dependable mother in the background. That was exactly how I wanted it. I moved between guests, offering snacks and keeping the energy light. I laughed at small jokes, asked polite questions, and let everyone see a family that looked as close-knit as ever. The warmth was real enough, but it was also a shield, a moment of calm before the truth broke through. When it came time for cake, the room gathered in a loose circle around the table. Sarah dimmed the lights, and we all sang "Happy Birthday" as Lily's eyes sparkled in the candlelight. I clapped along with everyone else, my heart swelling as she made her wish and blew out the candles. It was in that warm glow, when everyone was smiling, when Alex's guard was at its lowest, that I felt the timing fall into place. Not yet for the confrontation itself, but for setting the stage. After the cake, people drifted into smaller conversations. Alex's colleagues chatted in the corner, Sarah's friends complimented the decorations, and Alex began tidying the table. I approached him, calm and composed. "Alex," I said lightly, "could I have a moment to say something after Lily opens her gifts? Just something personal, for family and close friends." He looked pleasantly surprised. "Of course, Mom, that's sweet. She'll love that." I smiled, a mother's smile. "It's something I've been meaning to share for a while." He nodded, still unsuspecting, then went back to stacking plates. I stepped back, my pulse steady. Everything was in motion. The people I wanted present were here. The environment was warm, controlled. Alex had no idea that within an hour, the image he'd worked so hard to maintain would shift. When Lily began opening her presents, I sat nearby, clapping and laughing with everyone else. But in my mind, I reviewed the sequence of what I would say, the documents I had prepared, and the order in which I would reveal them. There would be no shouting, no chaos. Just the simple, undeniable truth presented in a way that left no space for denial. And when the moment came, Alex wouldn't just hear my words. He would see the room watching, the witnesses he had invited, and the consequences of underestimating me. When Lily finished opening her last gift, the living room was full of warm laughter and the rustle of torn wrapping paper. Sarah was busy thanking guests for their presents, and Alex was smiling broadly, clearly pleased that everything had gone smoothly. I took a breath, stepped forward, and tapped my glass lightly. The soft chime caught everyone's attention. "I hope you don't mind," I said with a gentle smile, "but I'd like to say a few words, just something small." Alex grinned. "Of course, Mom, go ahead." I looked around the room, my gaze sweeping across family, neighbors, and Alex's colleagues. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," I began warmly. "Lily's birthday is a reminder of what family means: love, trust, and the home we build together." I paused, letting the words settle. Then I reached into the small folder I'd placed on the side table earlier. "Speaking of home," I continued softly, "there's something I'd like to share. Something I've kept quiet for too long." The room went still. Alex's smile tightened. "Mom, maybe this isn't the time." I held up a hand, still smiling. "Oh, I think it's the perfect time. After all, it involves the house we're standing in." I opened the folder and held up a document. When Alex bought this house, he did so with a substantial down payment. What many of you may not know is that the down payment came entirely from the sale of my home. A few murmurs rippled through the guests. I saw one of Alex's colleagues glance at him, eyebrows raised. "What's more," I continued, unfolding a second page, "there's a supplementary agreement attached to the purchase documents. This addendum states that my financial contribution grants me equal rights as a co-owner of the property." Alex's face drained of color. "Mom, that's not—" I met his eyes calmly. "It's in writing, Alex, signed, legal. I made sure of that, even if you forgot." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Alex, you never told me there was an addendum." The room went silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Alex's colleagues looked distinctly uncomfortable, clearly sensing that something significant had just been dropped in their midst. I took a step closer to Alex, my voice still even but carrying an edge now. "If I'm just a guest here, Alex, maybe I should decide who gets to stay." The words landed like a stone in the quiet room. Alex's jaw clenched, his face flushing red. "Mom," he said through gritted teeth, "this isn't the place—" "It's exactly the place," I interrupted softly, "because for months I've been made to feel like a tenant in the home I paid to secure. I've stayed quiet, I've contributed, I've kept the peace. But the truth is, I am not here by your permission. I am here by right." Sarah stared at Alex, her voice trembling. "You told me she was just staying here temporarily. You said—" "I said what I thought was best at the time," Alex muttered, his eyes darting to the floor. "Best for who?" I asked gently. "Certainly not for the mother who sold her home, her security, so that you could have this roof over your head." No one in the room spoke. Even the hum of conversation had vanished, replaced by an awkward, heavy silence. I closed the folder and placed it on the table beside me. "This isn't about embarrassing you, Alex. This is about clarity. Everyone here deserves to know the truth, and so do I." Alex didn't answer. His face was pale, his posture stiff. Sarah stepped back from him slightly, her expression one of disbelief. The guests shifted uncomfortably, murmuring quietly to each other, but no one left. Everyone was waiting to see what Alex would say. But Alex had no words. The room seemed frozen in place. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint creak of the wooden floor as Sarah stepped back from Alex, her face pale. "Alex," she said, her voice low but steady, "is this true? Did you take her money for the down payment and never tell me she was a co-owner?" Alex's jaw flexed, his lips pressing into a thin line. I didn't think it mattered in the long run, he muttered. Sarah's eyes hardened. Didn't matter? She sold her home for this, and you've been making her pay monthly contributions like she's a stranger renting a room. Alex's face flushed. Sarah, it's more complicated than that. No, Sarah cut in sharply. It's not complicated, it's dishonest. The murmurs from the guests grew louder, though no one dared to interrupt. Alex's two colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances. I took a quiet breath, my voice calm. Alex, I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here because I've given you every chance to treat me as family, and instead you treated me as a liability. That ends today. Alex opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. Before you say anything else, there's something you need to know. I reached into my folder once more, pulling out a slim document. You remember when your father passed? After I sold our house, I didn't use every penny for this place. I set aside a portion into a private investment, a small rental property in my hometown. Alex's brow furrowed. What does that have to do with... I met his gaze evenly. It has everything to do with this. That property has been generating income for years. I've used part of it to help with expenses here. But make no mistake, Alex. If you continue to treat me as a guest, if you continue to make decisions behind my back, I will stop that support immediately, and I will secure my own home elsewhere. A sharp silence filled the room. Sarah looked stunned. Alex's face went from flushed red to pale gray. You've been supporting us financially? He asked, his voice quieter now. Yes, I said simply. Quietly, because I wanted to see you succeed. I wanted Lily to grow up in a stable home. But stability cannot be built on deceit. Sarah's expression shifted from shock to something else. Anger, but not at me. She turned to Alex. You've been hiding everything from me. The addendum, the refinancing, and now this. I can't even look at you right now. Alex ran a hand through his hair, looking as though the floor might give way beneath him. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he said weakly. But it did, I replied softly. And now you have a choice. You can keep treating me like a guest and watch me walk out that door taking my support with me, or you can accept that this is my home too and start treating me accordingly. The room remained still for a long moment. Alex's colleagues looked away, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to leave without seeing the conclusion. Sarah crossed her arms, waiting. Finally, Alex spoke, his voice quiet. I understand. I nodded once. Good. Then we can move forward. But things will not go back to how they were. There will be boundaries, and there will be respect. Sarah looked at me, her voice softer now. I'm so sorry, Linda. You didn't deserve any of this. I gave her a small smile. I appreciate that, Sarah. What matters now is what comes next. Alex said nothing more. The balance of the room had shifted, and he knew it. The narrative he had been quietly building for months had collapsed in front of the very people he'd invited here today. The weeks after Lily's birthday were quiet, uncomfortably so at first. The air in the house had changed. There were no more subtle remarks about my place in the household, no more suggestions about my schedule in the kitchen, no more closed-door conversations I wasn't meant to hear. Alex avoided unnecessary confrontation, and Sarah, though still polite, seemed to be watching him more closely than ever. I didn't press him. Change isn't instant. It takes time, especially when pride is involved. But I noticed small shifts that told me the conversation had left a mark. Alex started including me in discussions about bills, repairs, and plans for the house. It was awkward at first, as though he didn't quite know how to involve me, but the effort was there. Sarah, too, seemed different. A few days after the party, she knocked on my bedroom door one evening with a cup of tea in her hand. "Just thought you might like this," she said, offering a small smile. We sat together for almost an hour, talking about Lily's school and her dance recital coming up in the spring. It wasn't a deep conversation, but it was the most relaxed interaction we'd had since I moved in. Gradually, those moments became more frequent. Sarah would linger in the kitchen after dinner, sometimes asking about recipes or gardening tips. It felt less like she was tolerating me, and more like she was learning to see me as part of the household, not as an outsider, not as an extra presence to be managed. The most important change, though, came from me. For the first time since moving in, I began to set clear boundaries. I had always thought being quiet and accommodating would keep the peace, but I realized that silence had allowed the situation to escalate. One evening over dinner, I looked at Alex and Sarah and spoke plainly. "I want to be clear about something," I began. "This house is my home. I am not here on borrowed time. I am not here as a guest. My name may not be on the front mailbox, but my down payment is in these walls, and my legal rights are on record." Alex nodded, his expression serious. "I understand, Mom." "I hope you do," I said evenly, "because I won't have another conversation like the one we had at Lily's birthday. Boundaries need to be respected. Communication needs to be honest. And this house needs to be a place where we all feel secure, including me." Sarah glanced at Alex, then back at me. "That's fair, Linda, and I think we needed to hear that." The weeks turned into months, and slowly the tension began to lift. There were still moments when Alex seemed cautious around me, but they were fewer. He no longer treated me like a temporary occupant. When discussing any changes to the house, a new insurance policy, a repair to the roof, he brought me into the conversation. Sarah's shift was more gradual, but real. She started inviting me to join her when she met with her friends for lunch. I even noticed that she sometimes referred to the house as our home when speaking to me, not just her and Alex's, but mine as well. Lily, of course, remained the easiest part of it all. She never saw boundaries, never noticed ownership or contributions. To her, I had always been part of the heart of the home, and perhaps in her simple certainty, there was a lesson for all of us. Still, I kept my own plans secure. My rental property in my hometown remained untouched. My documents kept safe. I didn't wave them in Alex's face, but I also didn't forget their importance. Love, I had learned, does not negate the need for security. One Saturday afternoon, a few months after the birthday, Alex approached me in the garden while I was trimming the roses. "Mom," he said awkwardly, "I wanted to thank you for everything. I know I haven't always made it easy for you here." I looked up, studying his face. There was sincerity there, and maybe a trace of humility. "It's not about easy, Alex," I said. "It's about respect and trust. We have to work at those, both of us." He nodded. "I'm trying." "I know," I said softly, then turned back to the roses. "Keep trying." In the months that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect. Family never is, but it was grounded in a new understanding. The unspoken hierarchy that had quietly pushed me toward the edges of this home was gone. I had my place here, and everyone knew it. The first signs of spring arrived quietly, almost without notice. The mornings were brighter, the air warmer, and small buds began appearing on the rose bushes I had carefully tended all winter. Life in the house had settled into something resembling peace. There were still moments when I caught Alex watching me with a mixture of guilt and gratitude, moments when Sarah hesitated before speaking, but the edge that had once defined our interactions was gone. The walls of the house no longer felt like boundaries closing in on me. They felt finally like shelter. One Saturday, Lily bounded into my room just after breakfast, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Grandma, can we plant something new in the garden today?" she asked, holding a packet of flower seeds she'd picked out on a recent trip with Sarah. I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. "I think that's a wonderful idea." We gathered our tools and stepped into the yard, the earth soft beneath our feet. The sun was high, a gentle breeze moving through the air. Lily knelt beside me, carefully pressing seeds into the soil with her small fingers. As we worked, I felt the quiet comfort of the moment. For months, I had been holding on to tension, bracing for the next conflict. Now, kneeling in the garden with Lily, I felt something different, something lighter. When we finished planting, Lily sat back on her heels and looked at me. "Grandma," she said seriously, "will the flowers grow fast?" I laughed softly. "They'll grow in their own time. You can't rush them. But if we take care of them, they'll grow strong." She nodded solemnly as though committing the lesson to memory. Later that evening, after Lily had gone inside, I stayed in the garden a while longer. I thought about how much had changed since I moved in. I had come here believing love was enough, that my history with Alex, my years of sacrifice, would protect my place in his life. I had been wrong. Love matters, yes, but love alone doesn't protect you. Respect does. Boundaries do. Knowing your own worth does. I had learned that even with your own children, you cannot assume your value will always be recognized. Sometimes you must remind them. Sometimes you must protect what you've built. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard, I thought about the rental property in my hometown, about the documents in the bank, about the quiet security I had built for myself. I didn't need to wield them as weapons anymore. They were simply safeguards, like the fence that kept the garden safe from wind and wandering animals. That night, as we sat at the dinner table, Alex looked at me and said, "Mom, I've been thinking about everything. I want you to know I'm grateful for everything you've done. I don't want you to feel like a guest here ever again." I held his gaze, then nodded. "Gratitude is good, Alex, but respect is better. Remember that." He smiled faintly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe he understood. Months later, the flowers Lily planted began to bloom. She ran to me one morning, her voice bright. "Grandma, they're growing!" We went outside together, the garden awash with color. I knelt beside her, touching the petals gently. "See, I told you, if you care for something, it grows strong." She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Like our family?" I felt a lump rise in my throat, exactly like our family. In that moment, I realized the garden wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that even in a home where trust had been tested, new things could grow. And so, with my hands in the soil and my granddaughter by my side, I felt a quiet certainty. I had protected my place here, not just with documents or legal rights, but with boundaries, resilience, and an understanding of my own worth. Even with your own children, you must know your worth and protect it.